Support for the podcast is brought to you by Whole Heart Reproductive Mental Health. The mental health professionals of Whole Heart are certified in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, pregnancy loss and grief, and gender identity development. They are gender affirming and provide inclusive perinatal mental health care for queer folks. They offer in-office, group, and private individual and couple sessions in Philadelphia, as well as in-home sessions in Philadelphia and its mainline suburbs, South Jersey, and Delaware. Getting out of the house with a new baby can feel really overwhelming. Whether you're recovering from birth, experiencing postpartum anxiety or depression, are one of the 1 in 10 fathers who experience postpartum depression, or you're simply struggling with the transition to motherhood, or if you simply aren't ready to leave your home, you don't have to put off coming to therapy. They will come to you. Therapy is an investment into your own well-being. It's not selfish or self-indulgent to take care of yourself. To learn more or book an appointment, visit wholeheartmaternalmentalhealth.com. Hello, and welcome back to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seeks to learn everything I need to know just the hardest way possible. I'm on a mission to help others access the information they need much earlier in their journey and more easily. And to that end, today I am joined by Ashley Chopin. I did not ask you how to pronounce your last name. Did I do that right?
You nailed it.
Perfect. A certified child life specialist. And I have invited Ashley here so she can share with us what that even means. Most of us probably don't know who could benefit from a child life specialist and when we might want to call one in. Ashley, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited about this. It's rare that I've done this a really long time. My son is 14 and a half, so I started this around 13 years ago. Not this podcast, but this parenting consultant gig. And I was really surprised that if I don't know this, I can guarantee that a lot of people listening don't know either. But before we dig into that topic, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and how you came to do what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And please know that you are certainly not the only one. Lots of people don't know much about this, which is why I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's a lot of what we do in our profession is helping to educate other people about who we are and what we do. My journey began, I'm originally from New England. When I was in college, I was studying rehabilitation and disability studies with a concentration in children's developmental services. And I knew I always wanted to work with children, and I knew I wanted to work with unique populations. But it was still around my junior year, I was trying to figure out what that meant for me and how I could kind of hone in on that a little bit. And so I took a introduction to child life course when I was a junior, and I immediately fell in love with this profession and knew right then and there that was what I was meant to do the rest of my life.
Wow.
And so I moved forward. I got my master's degree in New York City. And now I'm out here in the Philadelphia suburbs, married with my 2 amazing kids. And right out of grad school, I got a job at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Most of my career, the last 13 years, was working primarily in the pediatric intensive care unit.
Okay.
And then my journey kind of continued forward into me exploring the world of private practice and child life, which is even more rare than child life.
Yes.
And so I have been doing that for just over 2 years now. And about a year ago, I left kind of my primary role at the hospital to do this private practice work full time.
Well, congratulations. And
Thank you.
Are excited and lucky to have you. If you aren't sure that's true, then wait till you know what this is, and maybe you'll decide that. So for those of us who don't know, which included myself until we met recently, what is a child life specialist?
Oh, I feel like sometimes it's such a loaded question, but I'm so excited to be here to tell you about it.
We will warn people, it's multi-layered. You got to stick with us.
It's very multi-layered. And there is a little bit of a trigger warning here. I think we also talk about some really hard things because child life specialists do some really hard things. Yeah. But it's an incredibly special and unique profession that really, like we kind of covered, not a lot of people know about it, and you don't know until you've needed to know. And we have kind of a huge umbrella of skills that can kind of cover over so many different circumstances. So to simplify it a little bit, I'll give you my elevator pitch and we'll kind of go from there. So we are certified professionals who are specifically trained and traditionally located in children's hospitals. And we provide the psychosocial or the social emotional care to children and families to help reduce stress and anxiety and prevent potentially traumatic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, to kind of further elaborate on that a little bit more, we're experts with backgrounds in child development who understand the importance of psychological preparation and developmentally appropriate education to really set kids and their families up for success, especially during some of the most difficult or potentially traumatic experiences that they have. So that could be painful medical procedures, it could be a new diagnosis, it could be a loss of any type, or even death. So we really support families of children of all different developmental ages and different abilities, and we really customize all of our interventions based on that child's developmental level and their circumstances. And then hopefully we're also able to kind of add on and create custom coping plans to help to really empower that child through that difficult experience. And so where you would typically find us the most are children's hospitals, clinics, nonprofits, but more and more you're starting to see us kind of pop up into those less traditional areas such as private practice, funeral homes, adult hospitals. Really, if you think about a child anywhere where they could potentially experience trauma or stress, we are really starting to try to kind of outreach into those areas more and more.
Got it. So tell us more. You say you're moving from the hospital setting to private practice. So how does the private practice world differ from that traditional setting? And like, what does that look like for you? Like, what are you doing now?
Yeah. And for the people who are familiar with child life, they're like, child life in private practice, like it's still quite a new concept for a lot of people. And it's something that's really exciting. And it's a really great evolution that's kind of happening within the profession right now. Yeah. And so we're a profession that we often get called in those really, oh shoot moments, right? When a child is experiencing something really stressful. Life, it happens all the time. We can't always necessarily plan for all of those really hard moments. But as a profession, to the best of our abilities, we really want to become involved as early on or before those hard experiences as best as possible, because we know how important psychological preparation is and education is prior to a hard event. So for many, many years, I loved working in the hospital. But as you continue to work in the hospital and you're helping with those really acute moments, you can also really see and recognize a significant need that's also out in the community as well. And knowing and kind of identifying that there's so much that is a part of our typical skill set that we can apply out in the community first prior to some of those really kind of stressful experiences. And so...
Right. Like it's all well and good to prep a kid while they're in the hospital for a procedure, but they maybe are already kind of freaked out that they're in the hospital. So you're doing more prep, like really, really advanced prep.
Exactly. Right. And so it could be, a variety of different needs and kind of helping to plan ahead and plan in advance. So maybe you have an appointment or you have an anticipated admission or you have a loved one who's already in the hospital and your child wants to go visit them. And so it's being even more intentional instead of getting them in the door and they've already got this look on their face. And we're trying to backpedal a little bit. It's about being a little bit more intentional. We say a proactive profession as opposed to a reactive profession. Right?
I was just going to say that.
Really intentionally be proactive. Yep, exactly.
Yep. That's beautiful. So what are some scenarios? I don't know if you want to list them or walk us through a few scenarios where a family might reach out for this private practice support and the child or the family would benefit. And like, what are you actually doing? What is the support?
Sure.
Which I know varies widely from situation to situation and everyone has their own needs.
It does. And that's why we truly do try to customize everything as, specifically to the family as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it completely depends on the environment, right? I think I would love to kind of start with the classic healthcare environment and then move into private practice, because I think the beauty of your audience is we're talking to all families. And one of the things that is so important to us as child life specialists is that we're really helping to provide families with the tools to be able to be empowered enough to do things on their own, to advocate on their own.
Because we're focusing so heavily on the child, but if I'm the parent and my child needs to be prepped for this stressful thing, I am stressed. Like I am also coping with that. So you kind of need an outside, clear-headed, less emotional person to like do that, right?
Absolutely. And you need to know where those resources are, not just contacting someone in private practice, but what are your resources out there, right? Which I know is
Yes.
something that you value greatly. So
That is my mission, my passion project, get people to the
exactly,
resources. We have so
exactly.
many great ones here. I mean, I haven't lived anywhere else in a long time, so I speak very fondly of the greater Philadelphia area, but I really do think we're just so rich with resources, particularly private people like yourself and myself, but we don't necessarily have the magnification to let everybody know, what we're doing. So that is kind of the goal of this here.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I hope with kind of the question that you asked, really helping to kind of get some good concrete examples. So when families are listening, they can say, hey, that's something I want to keep in my back
Okay.
pocket the next time I have to go to our local hospital, clinic, anything like that.
Right.
So to kind of get into that and think about some classic examples of what we can do for any and all environments, whether it's the healthcare environment or private practice, thinking about, you know, preparing a child for their first surgery, helping a child to learn about a new diagnosis and their treatment plan, helping a child to feel less afraid when they're visiting someone they love in the hospital for the first
Mm.
time. Learning how to swallow pills. Think about,
Oh,
we don't think about that until we think about
I
it,
see
right?
so many parents in these groups that I'm in begging for tips for swallowing pills.
Absolutely. And so, although that's not the traditional, hey, my child's going to have surgery, I need psychological preparation, what are, the skill sets that child life specialists already have, where we've got that developmental background, we've got the techniques that we use, we're more commonly referred to as the play ladies, which is kind of a tricky one because, yes, we run around with toys in our hands, and yes, we use play as the foundation of what we do, but there is a theoretical foundation for every approach that we take. And so, yeah, why can't we take something as stressful as pill swallowing
Right.
and make it fun and silly and playful and strategic and intentional to help
Mm.
empower that child to be able to swallow pills and not feel so scared or nervous, especially as they grow older, right? Because I think we all know adults that have a hard time swallowing pills.
Yeah.
And
I
so
could not
it needs to
swallow
be
a
really
pill until my
effective.
little sister came along and did it. And I was like, oh no,
Uh-huh.
you're
Yeah.
7 years younger than me. You are not going to show me up like that.
Yeah,
My mom and
it's
always
one of
put
those.
it on a spoonful of jelly. I still needed that.
Yeah, and it's one of those skills I don't even remember learning as a child, but I can see more and more, especially in a time where we have kids with, significant needs, significant healthcare needs, or anxiety, the life
Mhm.
stressors, just so many things that kids are kind of having come at them these days. That's a great example of what is something that we can do really intentionally, really supportively, and really give them the tools and empower them to be successful so they can master something and continue to be active and engaged participants in their own healthcare, right? That's a big kind of
Yeah.
pillar of what we do and why is to help to set them up for success so they can continue to be compliant and care for themselves and care and be at their
So they
most
feel like it's
healthy
not something being
selves.
done to them. It's something they're participating in.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Really, really good point.
and so kind of thinking about some other examples as I kind of rattle off my list of things, we do a lot of therapeutic processing and helping kids to process really big feelings and process really big topics such as death specifically.
Hmm.
And so that's something I think is really hard for a lot of parents to think about, and they're certainly not prepared for, right? I kind of say to families all the time, that book that all of us pretended to read when we were pregnant, What to Expect When You're Expecting, there's not a
Right.
section in there, how to talk to your kid about death, how to help your child grieve. Like
Right.
that's not in the parenting manual that none of us actually
Right.
read, but we like to think, we tried to tap into.
Well, and again, we're managing our own feelings at the same time. So it's really hard to show up maybe the way you'd want to for your kid or to know the words. You don't even know what to say to yourself yet.
Exactly. And so that's where, part of my drive from moving to my, let's call it a traditional role in the hospital out to private practice is because so many people, once they're experiencing something really hard like that, I'm constantly hearing, I had no idea this was a thing. I didn't even think about the fact that I needed to be intentional with my child about the language. I didn't even think about the implications to say she died in her sleep. I don't even know what resources are out there to talk about this really hard thing that we also have a really hard time talking about as a society and as people and as adults, right? It's a really uncomfortable topic for a lot of people. And so as I transitioned into my current role, that is actually one of my specialties, is helping families um, support their children processing and navigating loss. And loss can mean all sorts of different things, right? Loss could be a divorce. It could be moving away from their community and their school, but it could also, of course, include death as well. And that could be helping a child to process a death of someone they know, or even their own death, if that's the case as well. And so, to kind of paint a bigger picture as I talk about child life as a whole, and I talk about kind of our backgrounds and our skill sets, to kind of give you a little bit more of an example of what child life specialists can do at the time of and helping a family to process and navigate the topic of death, is helping them to answer those really hard questions, right? Like a parent who says, I have no idea where to start. How do I explain to my 6-year-old that their 8-year-old brother is going to die? Helping to identify resources like children's books are one of my favorite things to use, because it's a great opportunity to validate to a child. It's a great opportunity to introduce certain topics to your child. It's a great opportunity to open up conversations with your child, right? And also helping families to create really tangible and meaningful mementos. So I personally can come to your home. I can go to funeral homes. I can go into other hospitals to help create really beautiful pieces of artwork. And whether that's on behalf of and creating it from someone, or incorporating and inviting that child or that family to be a part of that process together to ensure that it's really therapeutic and meaningful.
And I feel like those are the things that we might regret if someone doesn't suggest it at the moment. Later, we might be like, oh, I wish I had thought to, because again, you're just not super clear headed, and you're probably very like big picture oriented. That's very, very sweet. Yeah. And I'm sure what the keepsake is varies just from
Absolutely.
person to person. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it could be a really helpful, tangible thing, especially for children at certain developmental ages that have a really hard time understanding the finality, right, of death, or having they're kind of struggling to cope with understanding the loss, but now they have something physical and tangible that they can have with them to help them to kind of further move through that grief process.
Right. And then, so are you supporting this child or family like in a bubble, or are you coordinating with whatever other providers they have?
So from a private practice perspective, it varies from family to family. I've had pediatrician offices reach out to me and say, one of our patients has died. What do we do? How do we help? What resources can we give this family? So maybe I've done that support where I've never met the family before, but I funneled everything through the physician's office just to be a support within the community. Other families, they might say, hey, on our behalf, we really need you to reach out to so-and-so, whether it's another psychosocial professional or something like that. Definitely partnering with funeral homes and or hospital staff, if that's appropriate, if that requires me to go in or provide some type of intervention in that environment. So it really depends in terms of kind of who we collaborate with and how. In the hospital, the collaboration is off the charts. We are we are a profession that knows that in order to provide really fantastic, full family-centered psychosocial care, you got to get the full village, right, together and involved. And that includes the parent too. I think sometimes when we think about who do we partner with, who do we co-treat with, who do we connect with, we know that we can't do what we do without the partnership of the primary caregivers, and really partnering with them and further empowering them and giving them the tools. One example that's kind of popping into my head right now is I have a client right now who I have been working with their children since they experienced an unexpected loss in the fall. And this past week, they were experiencing an expected loss. And this mom, I'm doing my normal sessions with the children, and the mom kind of brings me in and she's like, thank God we have you. I have no idea how do we do this again? But how do
Oh
we do it again
gosh.
and differently? And so
Oh,
then I am, working with the parents and coaching with the parents, and the girls had no idea that we even had this full conversation, giving them the language that they needed, specific approaches. Okay, this is the foundation I laid during our session tonight. Here's
right.
where you're going to pick up where I left off.
Oh,
And
that's great.
really just like
So
partnering.
sometimes you're really working with the parents, sometimes you're working with the
Absolutely.
child,
Yep.
sometimes you're all over.
Yeah, it entirely depends. But just like with my student interns who say, I really love working with kids, I said, well, you better love working with parents too, because you cannot work with children
Right.
without working with their parents as well. So yeah, I
Right.
have plenty of clients where I've never actually met the children before,
Yeah.
but I video chat or chat on the phone with the parents, and I coach them through, okay, this is where your child is at developmentally. These are their biggest concerns and misconceptions.
Mhm.
Here's the words that you can use to set them up for success. Here's my book recommendation just for your family. And, here's a conversation. Here's how you're going to have it in this room at this time
And
with this
I'm
in your
sure
kid's
parents
hand.
value that so much, even with what we do with the help with sleep and help with potty training. Parents are like, what you just said, can you like type out that exact thing? Like, I need a script of what to say and what not to
Yep.
say. And we're
Yep.
like, sure.
I follow up all the time. I'll say, this conversation we just had, I'm going to literally text it to you word for word, and you're going to have it in your back pocket
That's
for when you're
awesome.
ready. Because I think that when we are really stressed and scared and worried, we tend to fall back into those cliche responses, and things that we find really comforting as adults.
Yeah.
And then I point out to them how terrifying it can be
Well, like you
for a
mentioned
child to hear.
earlier, and I
Yeah.
could see someone easily making
Yeah.
this, if we want to label it a mistake, of like, oh, they just fell asleep and
Mhm.
never woke up. And then I
Yep.
could see that child being like, well, could that happen to me? And therefore, I'm
Absolutely.
never going to sleep again.
Yep.
And sleep becomes this
Mhm.
dreadful
Mhm.
thing. So, and then the parent must feel so guilty for even phrasing it that way and putting the thought in their head.
And as if our parent guilt isn't bad enough,
Right.
right? So like
For
they don't
real.
need any more guilt. So we will cover and talk about, here are the comforting things we typically say that is comforting for us as adults because we love cliche things, but it's not comforting for your child. And then also the euphemisms as well, the things that we find really comforting. So for example, God just loved him so much that he's with God now because God, he needed to be with him. And while that is beautiful and comforting for some of us, wowzers McGowzers, that's terrifying for a
Yes, for
young
real.
child who's then like, well, am I not loved or good enough?
Right.
Right. And so once you
Or
start
can I
talking,
just be suddenly taken? The flip side of that.
exactly. So once we start having those conversations and really saying, hey, this is something I'm thinking about, this is something I'm worried about, this is something I know, here are some other ways we can approach this while still honoring and respecting your family's wishes and
Yeah.
beliefs. And we can talk about those euphemisms as soon as we know your child has a concrete understanding of things first, and they're
Yeah.
not scared or stressed.
Right.
And then we can fold in those other layers.
Okay, beautiful. And you mentioned the word sessions earlier, which makes me want to ask, and I'm sure the answer is it varies widely.
I love that answer.
What does working together look like, or what can it look like in terms of like timeline, frequency, level of interaction?
Yes, so you're right. The first start to my answer is it varies. So the beauty of kind of the real foundation of what we do, and one of the most important parts to our skill set, is creating a good assessment and customizing everything to a family and their individual needs, right? And so, like I mentioned it before, it could be to your child's developmental level, it could be to your circumstance, it could be to your environment. So in the hospital environment, we could do a fantastic intervention in less than 5 minutes. And really, it could be a powerful intervention because that's the nature of the environment.
Right.
What I'm finding more now in private practice is child life colleagues of mine at the hospital are actually referring to me because, they're identifying a significant psychosocial need that can't be addressed in 10, 20, or 30 minutes while they're at their back-to-back appointments because they have really complex medical needs, right? So then they might reach out to a family and say, hey, these are all the things I would love to do with your child because I think it would help them significantly. This environment's just not conducive to that. Consider reaching out to a child life specialist out in the community who can then,
Right.
go into the home and offer really customized support. So when
Yeah.
we think about a traditional private practice structure. It's a 50-minute session. Some private practice clinicians have offices. My specific model is that I come to your home or whatever appropriate environment is. And the sessions can be individual with the child. It can be a full family session. It can be with siblings. I have some clients where I see the siblings together. Some of them I see the siblings back to back. And it's really meant to meet the need, and that's it. So I have some clients, I have seen them for 3 really solid targeted sessions, and then we concluded our relationship because they didn't need my services anymore. I also have some children who I've seen for over a year consistently because they're still processing through some really big feelings related to, let's say, grief because someone they love died, and then a few months later their parents were separated, right? So we're constantly navigating these really hard topics. So Child Life is truly, truly customized to every possible need.
That's amazing. And I think that's the benefit of private practice is that there aren't any rules. You aren't beholden to anyone. You can really, really hone in on each family and each kiddo and give them just exactly what they need. I didn't prep you for this question, but I know you can handle it. We've talked about a lot of very heavy types of scenarios. Is there anything that's too small? Like, let's say I have a kid, they do not have any medical issues, but once a year when they get that blood draw at their well visit, it's like, they're just freaking out. Is that something you could help with?
Absolutely. There's nothing too small and there's no intervention too short. I know every clinician's a little different, but in my private practice, there's no minimum commitment or anything like that. So you could, engage with me just for one virtual session, pick my brain, get some coping techniques, get some strategies, and you're good to go. I could meet with your child one time, do a solid intervention. If that's what's appropriate for your child, it might be that hey, this one time wasn't enough. I would really recommend that we do another good 2 or 3 sessions, right? But nothing is too small because we want to be intentional about setting our kids up for success. And something like needle phobia is not only incredibly common, but it's incredibly valid right now that kids have needle phobia. If you look at the kind of the statistics and the numbers of the increase of immunizations over the years, our kids should be scared and upset when they get needles. It is a really stressful thing. And then as parents, it's really stressful because you're like, gosh, why is my kid losing their marbles? And I had no problem getting vaccines when I was a kid. Well, things are very, very different than when we were kids and, when our parents were kids. So, so no, nothing is too small.
And I presume under the category of loss, which we kind of already touched on, we didn't mention pets specifically, but you did say any kind of loss. So I'm sure you get that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something, more commonly kids are exposed to regularly, right? And then parents are like, oh, okay, I think it's also common sometimes for parents to be like, oh, they're fine, and or we kind of treat our little kids like big adults, like, this is what it is and we're moving on. But not only is it a hard thing to navigate, but these are really, really valuable opportunities to lay a really healthy foundation.
That's what I was thinking, because there will be heavier losses and we don't want to think about it, but at some point, and a lot may hinge on your experience with it prior.
I have a really great example of a lovely family that I've been working with. One of the parents has terminal brain cancer, and I've been working closely with the other parent to kind of navigate her 2 very young children and how we can be really, really intentional about supporting them over the final few months of this parent. And they had reached out to me not too long ago because they had just gotten a fish 2 days before and the fish died. And she's like, okay, so my mom wants to run out and just replace the fish. And I was like, no, this is the best time for you to promote the understanding of the finality of, not only, all living things die, but then also we can't just replace it. It can't just be fixed again. He didn't fall asleep.
Right.
And I was so proud. I was so proud of this mom when she was like, I knew that you would say something like that. I told my mother-in-law not to go out and get a new fish.
Oh, mother-in-law.
I mean, best intentions, right? That's what we do. We want to protect our kids.
Yeah.
A lot of the mistakes that we make as parents are because we're trying to protect our kids.
Yeah. And it's just so hard to see your kids in pain. It's even hard to watch your kids cope, especially if coping is a new thing or something that's, some kids are obviously more, that comes to them more easily than others.
Yep.
But yeah, we aren't doing them any favors if we eliminate those opportunities. Okay, so if a family is listening to this today and they're coping with grief or loss, or their child is, or they know that there's one of those transitions coming and it's going to be difficult, what would you say to them, or what else do you want them to hear today?
I would encourage them to treat themselves like they would treat a friend in this similar situation, right? We tell our friends, reach out, ask for help, be kind to yourself, give yourself grace. And we say that a lot, give yourself grace, give yourself grace. But what does that really mean? And what do you mean when you're telling somebody else that? And so really treat yourself like you would treat one of your friends, and then take that advice. And part of giving yourself grace and taking care of yourself is reaching out and asking for help and accessing your resources. I think, when we're dealing with really hard things ourselves, I believe I saw, Erica, you also say you can't pour from an empty cup.
And that's I'm going to say that soon again for anyone who hasn't quite grasped it yet.
I think it took me a long time to understand really what it meant. But when you think about, grief and loss, for example, and you're mourning the loss, whether it's anticipated or after the fact, you can't possibly do all the right things by your child when you're trying to figure out your own grief and your own processing and your own support. And you can only last in autopilot for so long, where you stuff that stuff away and you're taking care of your children because you're super parent and that's what we do. That doesn't help either. But if you ask for help and you reach out to your resources, and your resources could be, sure, private practice child life, but it could also be your local clinics, your local hospital, your local resources. Let's say you're navigating a loss and that individual is at the hospital currently, right? And so we're talking about anticipatory grief and we're getting ready to lose that person. That's when you reach out to the team and say, what are the resources? How can you help my child? How can you help me to figure out how to support my child? What are the nonprofits in the area? We have some fantastic organizations that for completely free will help to support families or connect children with other children, support groups, things like that. So I think my biggest kind of message to anybody who is ever navigating any of this really hard stuff is to truly take what is probably usually our own advice and accept and invite and ask for help from other people. Because, again, it wasn't until I became a parent that I really understood it takes a village. And man, does it take a village.
Yeah. And sometimes that is the best way. As a person who really, really, really struggled and still somewhat struggles with accepting help when it's offered, but especially asking for it when it isn't, that is something I'm learning to do now, of like, what would I say to my good friend? And so that's what I should say to myself. Yeah. And sometimes if that's how you have to get there, that's fine too. Well, this is fascinating. Life is hard. I mean, I know that's such an understatement, but life is hard. And I feel like for kids, it has been, some of these kids we're talking about are COVID babies, right? So like they had just a really hard start and then transition back into normal life or whatever our new normal was. Or some of them were old enough that they kind of had normal life stripped away. Like, I just feel like it's even harder to be a kid now, which means parenting is harder, and to just know that there's someone out there that knows all the developmental stuff that we want to be so careful about, but can also take some of this load off of us and give us the reassurance that we're saying the best things and doing the best things, and doing no harm, I think is just amazing. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining me. I will, of course, let everyone know how to find you. And it sounds like if you weren't to be the right resource, if they needed something else for some reason, you'd still be a good place to start. We all just want to get families to where they need to be. Parents, thank you for listening. Caregivers, I will be back soon with more stuff that I wish I knew sooner. And in the meantime, I will leave you with a list of stuff I've learned the hardest way. Number one, we are not meant to do life or parenting alone. So as we already said, I'll say it again, accept help when it's offered, ask for it when it isn't. Number 2, you can't pour from an empty cup. Schedule ways to refill yours every day. The scheduling is important. The to-do list will never be done. I used to do like, I'll do myself when this is done. And then it would just grow. So put yourself on the list, hopefully at the top, block off even a few minutes if you need to do that. And finally, and most importantly, there is no way to be a perfect parent. There are countless ways to be a really good one. So let's make that our goal. And thank you, everybody, so much. I will be back soon. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.